Hello everybody, we're another day closer to the Summer Showdown and the tension's really starting to peak. Like, everybody I talked about it's getting super excited and a lot of debate about how these brackets are going to go. I know we missed March Madness earlier in the year in college basketball, but this feels like this bracket is just as hard to fill out. So let's get into it. First off, I want to say thank you for watching, and if you want, please subscribe, comment, feel free to add to the conversation. I love responding. And I have a blog where you can check out in the description if you want to check out more Overwatch League content where I post things that I might not always make a video about. So let's get into it. I think that NA is going to be a crazy tournament bracket, and it's going to be almost impossible to predict, whereas I feel Asia might be a little bit easier, but there's still a lot of interesting topics to go around. So I'm actually going to be doing my predictions live here as we discuss through it. But I want to talk about these two teams specifically on screen for a moment, the Valiant and the Eternal. I think these are honestly two of the most interesting teams coming into this tournament. The Valiant, of course, are looking really good, and Shax and KSP, everyone is starting to consider one of the best duos in their conference at the moment. But they get to go against the Toronto Defiant first match, and so they should be able to handle that pretty easily. And I am confident they'll be able to do that. But they just got beat by the Paris Eternal 3-1 last week in fairly convincing fashion, especially with Sparkle going absolutely crazy. But what does that mean? Because the Eternal haven't been great either. I feel like there's a lot of recency bias going on right now, specifically just because of this match against the Valiant. But if you look at their two matches before that, they got beat by the San Francisco Shock pretty handedly, and the week before that they took Boston Uprising to Game 5 before winning out. And that's a bit worrying, but obviously they did beat the Valiant, and I think that is kind of what you have to go off of because Sparkle's so new to the team that I feel like every week it means a lot of a difference as far as team chemistry and how they perform together and stuff and figuring out the meta together. So I do think it is important that we consider the Valiant the most important, but we don't forget that they barely squeaked by the Boston Uprising and then got pretty handily beat by the Shock. I think that shows they aren't really competition for the Shock, but it will be interesting to see how the Paris Eternal do, especially if they can figure out how to work Genji in this meta really well. But for the Valiant, they have looked better, but they did get beat by the Eternal. I think Shax and KSP will bounce back though. It is impossible to take one series and judge their whole tournament off of it, and overall this team does look really solid. Dream and McGravy have become one of the most solid tank duos I'd say in NA that we didn't really expect, like a standout duo. Last Show and Rain, I'm really not like convinced of either way. I don't think they're bad, but I don't really think they're great, you know what I mean? I just think they're really solid, like core pieces for your franchise where you can count on them to do what they need to do even if they're not going to absolutely carry the series. And KSP and Shax are obviously amazing, but let's get into it. First off, I think the Dallas Fuel versus Paris Eternal, or hold on, I'm actually put it on the screen so you guys can see. Let's pause that and move over to our Overwatch bracket. The Valiant versus the Defiant, like I was saying, the Valiant should be able to win that pretty easily. I don't think the Defiant are going to stand much of a chance. They have not looked great lately, especially after losing to the Dallas Fuel. I do think the Dallas Fuel are underrated, or at least were this past week, because everyone was saying, yeah, they're down and out, they don't have Decay. I do think the Defiant are bad, but the Valiant should be able to win either way, whether or not the Defiant played bad or even better than they did last week. So the Gladiators vs Justice, this is another one I think the Gladiators should be able to take. Gladiators really looking weak though for where we expect them to be, and I'm so unconvinced by these guys. Their team pressure, I just made a video the other day about how the Shock are so good at controlling ground. This feels kind of like a similar situation where I feel like Gladiators can set themselves up into some pretty decent situations, but they just can't capitalize or get over aggressive and get way out of position, and it ends up falling apart a lot. I just feel like the team decision making as a whole has been kind of rough lately with when to go aggro, when to commit to things, stuff like that. But overall, I do think they are better than the Justice. The Justice are struggling, but they have picked up a few pieces like Mikey on tank and stuff that they think will be able to help rebuild their team, and I think that's good. They've shown a little bit of progress. Better doesn't mean good. I do think the Gladiators will take it. Next up is the Florida Mayhem versus the Houston Outlaws. This one will actually be a really good series, I think, especially if Dante and Linkster can compete with BQB and Yaki. I do think the Mayhem will win it out. I think the Mayhem are the biggest threat to the Shock at the moment, especially after seeing what the Shock were able to do to the Fusion last week. So the Mayhem should be able to take this one. I do like what the Outlaws are doing though. I think hydration's been critical to making this franchise on the tournament. And like fans of the Outlaws have had several times throughout their franchise's history to be like, okay, this is it, this is the turnaround moment. But if ever there was a time where I thought the Houston Outlaws could really pull out a big upset run in a tournament or show that they really are a turnaround franchise, it'd definitely be this tournament. I could see the Outlaws beating the Mayhem, but I do think the Mayhem will take it. Next up, the Eternal and the Fuel. I think the Eternal will take this one. I do like the Fuel. I think No is an underrated player. I think he has a reputation for being solid, but I do think he's a really good player that doesn't get the reputation he deserves. But Paris Eternal, I don't think that the Fuel will be able to handle XZ and Soon and Sparkle, especially Sparkle on that Genji after putting up incredible numbers last week. That the Paris Eternal should be able to handle this relatively easily. We've seen Benbest and Hanbin really improve this year. I believe it was ATP Overwatch. Check out his channel. He just did a video the other day talking about 10 of his most underrated or no, was it? I think he was just doing his whatever video he was doing. Check out like all his videos until you find it. He was discussing Benbest as a tank and how he's really improved this year, and I totally agree. Benbest has been a spectacular improvement over what he was last year, and part of that might be because of Hanbin, I think, coming in on an off-tank role and really playing a solid position that I don't think people have given enough credit. If I were to make my own underrated players list, I think Hanbin would be in there. And otherwise, I love this Paris Eternal roster. I think the DPS trio of XZ, Soon, and Sparkle is one of my favorites as a fan, and just as an analyst, of course. But the tank lines really improved to the point where I believe that they can be like a solid core for this franchise moving forward. And the support line are some of the biggest playmakers in the league, even if they're not always the best. I do think they have the potential to impact the match at any given moment. Paris Eternal should be able to take that one and move into the next round of the bracket. And that's where it gets interesting, because now we have the picks. And so the San Francisco Shock, with the number 1 seed, would be picking first, and I would definitely think they'd go with the LA Gladiators here. I don't think the Gladiators have any chance of competing. Even if in a match the Gladiators would have a decent chance against any of the teams of the Valiant, Mayhem, Eternal, even though I don't really think they'd have a chance against Valiant or Mayhem. I don't think the San Francisco Shock would pick the Eternal simply because they're the lowest seed, because the Eternal have been playing a weirder style with this Genji, and the Shock don't want to have to deal with the extra strategy. Just go with the Gladiators, a team that will play at least a somewhat similar composition, somewhat similar style, and just roll them because you're better than them individually and team-wise. So that moves us down to the Atlanta Reign, where they can pick whoever they want. And at this point, I think this is the team that would pick the Paris Eternal. I think the Valiant and the Mayhem are mechanically better than the Reign, and as a team they function better. And I think the Reign would just kind of lose to either of those teams pretty consistently. Like if you play 10 matches, the Reign have the roster and definitely the potential to break out any given moment to beat any of those teams. And to that point, I think it just comes down to consistently which team you think you have the better matchup against. And in that case, I think it's against the Eternal. The Reign have actually played some Torbjorn, which could be crucial for shutting down the Sparkle's Genji. And that's one of the reasons I do think that they will end up picking the Eternal. The Philadelphia Fusion pick next, and that leaves the Mayhem and the Valiant. And that's where it gets tough, doesn't it? I really don't know what they would pick here at this point. I feel like they might go... I should have thought this far out ahead in advance. That's funny, isn't the Fusion? I think they'd pick the Mayhem, honestly. I think Yaki and BKB are good, but I think that the Fusion think Carpe could outclass them. Because... in recent weeks we've seen Yaki and BKB drop off a little bit here and there. The Valiant, the Shaxx, and KSP have done the same thing though, so it's kind of a toss-up. I think they would end up probably going with the Mayhem though. I think I rate the rest of Valiant's roster higher than... No, I don't. I like the Mayhem's roster more. But either way, I think they will end up choosing the Mayhem, and the Titans will be stuck with the Valiant. Moving on to the next round, Shock should be able to beat Gladiators. I don't think there's much discussion to be on there. Like I said, overall, the team play and the individual mechanics are just way better from the Shock. And for the Titans, the Valiant, I think the Valiant will be able to beat this, even though I have been very impressed with the Titans' new roster. And, seriously, they're an underdog team. We all know this. But give them some credit for what they've done in such a quick amount of time. They've really shown a lot of promise. I've really liked a lot of their players, and that they have the potential moving forward to make, some more of these tournaments, or if you know what I mean, that even if the regular season record isn't that great, they definitely have the potential to show us that they have some few core pieces, and maybe heading into next season, if they can replace some of the weak links, they'll be a solid team again. I loved seeing the Titans in their first season go through and dominate the league, and I'd like to see them return to some of that former glory. For the Fusion Mayhem, I do think that the Fusion could take this out. They struggled so mightily against the Shock, but the Florida Mayhem don't really play like the Shock. I think it'll come down to a lot more of allowing Carpe and Hisu to actually do something. If you didn't check out my video the other day on why the Shock are so good, that the Fusion literally couldn't do anything. Their DPS, Hisu didn't get an Ashe on the first point of Ilios until the 90%, and Carpe didn't get a single Pulse Bomb. And Pulse Bomb is a pretty fast charging ultimate, but they just shut him down so bad that he literally couldn't do anything. And I don't think the Flood Mayhem are going to be able to live up to that same kind of control that the Shock were. And so that's why I think the Fusion will be able to take them down when it finally comes to that, I'm going to say more balanced game, I guess, where the Fusion actually are allowed to play the game. Then for the Rain Eternal, this one is one I could see going either way. I really haven't been impressed with the Rain super much lately, but I am going to go with them. I don't think they've shown me too many flaws for me to believe that they're one of the worst teams in the league. I do think Paris Eternal's Genji could cause some problems, but we'll see how the Fuel deal with that. And if the Fuel are able to handle Eternal pretty well, like their Genji play, then I definitely think the Rain will be able to, especially with that Torbjorn that Baby Bay can pull out. And they definitely have the mechanics to pull out any series. But that moves us into the semifinals. The Shock and the Valiant, I think the Shock can pull this out. Even though the Valiant will be interesting to see against them, I do think the Shock are better, and there's not really too much to be said again. The Shock are overall just the best roster, no matter who they field. And I'll actually be really interested to see if they play Rascal on that Brigade again over like a Moth being in the lineup, because we saw Lamoth actually benched for a few of the maps. They still played really well. Obviously, they swept the Fusion, but obviously everyone thinks Moth's one of the best supports in the league, and I do too. So it'll be interesting to see how they utilize him as they move through this bracket. Next up, the Fusion Rain. This is another one where I do think the Fusion will be able to squeak it out, but I think this will be a really tough road for them. I think the Mayhem Rain is almost as tough of a matchup as you could have gotten, other than substituting like the Valiant in for the Rain. So the Fusion, I think they will struggle, but I think they will get to the finals in order to rematch the Shock, where the Shock win it out. For that matchup, like I said, we just saw them get 3-0'd, but the Fusion are going to adapt. They're not going to get beaten that badly again if they do make the finals. It's just not going to happen. They're going to be able to adapt. It's way harder for the Shock to keep up that level of dominance in a 1 week difference, you know what I mean? But I do think it'll be interesting to watch at that. We'll see if the Fusion... Wow. Sorry, I've been up since like 4:45. The Fusion will be able to adapt and overcome some of the struggles from last week, but the Shock should be able to beat them out. And we get to Asia, where, honestly, I could see like 5 upsets being had here. We have the Shanghai Dragons with the first round bye, so that's good for them. They don't have to worry about any potential upset early on. And then we move into London Spitfire Seoul Dynasty. This is an incredible matchup. These are my 2 favorite teams in Season 1. The Spitfire are still my favorite team, but I do think the Spitfire will be able to eke it out here. They look really good. I thought, although Babel and Glister are a really solid trio that haven't gotten much attention, this roster has really been criminally underrated. I wrote an article on that on my blog if you want to check out more about them. The Seoul Dynasty have the pieces there, and we've seen several big recent developments, especially with Michelle coming back into the lineup. He's a really solid player and fills out this lineup really nicely, I think. And he was one of the main reasons they performed so well this past week. And I believe he got Player of the Week honors, at least Player of the Match honors for his series. And that could be huge coming into the series against the Spitfire, where the Spitfire aren't super experienced. They definitely have some rough edges to them. And even though the Seoul Dynasty have been struggling, we all know what they can do on any given day. And they have the pieces there, so they could easily beat the Spitfire. But I do think the Spitfire will be able to take down the Dynasty. Next up, we have the Charge Hunters. Both teams, I am not convinced on either way. The Charge are definitely good, and they're going to win this match against the Hunters. But they have such a weak map differential. They've barely squeaked by in all of their wins. I believe it was 3 of their last 4 games have been to Game 5. But the Chengdu Hunters have been really bad, and I'm not a huge fan of many of the players in this roster at the moment. I know they're fun to watch, but they aren't great. I really think Among and Ating, either option you put in there, they have several glaring weaknesses that the Chengdu Hunters, the rest of the roster, can't really fill in for. And as far as the meta goes, I just think they don't have the individual talent to take down Happy and Nero and Eileen. And Happy especially has been dominant lately, and the Hunters are going to struggle in this matchup, so the Charge should be able to beat this and make it to the semifinals. Next up, we have the Excelsior and the Spark, where I do think the Excelsior can eke it out. The Excelsior actually lost to the Spark a few weeks ago in a Game 5 that the Excelsior arguably could have won, but in that specific matchup, I was really impressed with the Hangzhou Spark, especially QQ and Mika and Architect, of course, coming over from the Shock recently. But that matchup, even though it was close, the Spark got dominated the next week, which is a shame because I was really high on them. And even though they did lose pretty badly even, I think that the Spark had a lot of bright signs, and they're really close to figuring it out, which makes me think this will be a close series. But I do think the Excel will eke it out. Holy cow. I need to sleep more before I make videos. I do think the Excelsior will get out in the end to move on to the semifinals. Shanghai Dragons London Spitfire. This one, again, is another pretty easy one because the Dragons just dominated the Spitfire a week or two ago. And even though I think it'll be interesting to watch because these are... Man, I have a problem with sports. I don't hate enough teams. I love too many teams. The Spitfire, Dynasty, Excelsior, Spark, and Dragons are all like super close. Like the Spitfire are my #1 team. But then the Dragons, the Dynasty, the Excelsior, and the Spark are all like vying for like second place in my heart. And I don't know who to root for as a fan, but as an analyst, I do think the Dragons will come out over the Spitfire, but I'll definitely be super interested as a fan because I love watching these guys. I love watching the Dragons ever since their Season 1 terrible performances. They've really turned around as a franchise, and I love watching that in traditional sports and esports, whatever it is. So it's so fantastic to see these guys going through and dominating so much. It's literally like the shock. I don't think these guys should have any problems advancing to the finals. Next up, the Charge Excelsior, and this is where I'm going to take another chance. I'm going to give the Excelsior a chance here. I really believe this roster has so much untapped potential. They could be so good, guys. If we look at Season 1, I miss those days. I miss when we would see Saviol be on that stage dominating everybody, and it just hasn't happened lately. There's so much potential here. They have the combinations of players. We've seen Mandu come in and really play well, and we obviously know how great Jonak can be. He won Season 1 MVP, even if the skill gap has closed there a little bit between most of the teams, that this roster on any given week could absolutely dominate, but they just can't figure it out. But I think that the past few weeks, they're so close. They're so close. And I believe that eventually they're going to figure out that DPS duo that can really handle the Charges lineup, and that might be this week, and I hope to see it. I think that it'll go to Dragons Excelsior in the finals. But then when it gets to the finals, I do think the Dragons should be able to walk over Excelsior pretty easily. I really like the Excelsior roster, but I'll look at the alpha of that in a second. But the Dragons are just overall too good. Their DPS lineup is really good. And even though I like Jonak and Mandu as a support lineup, Izayaki and Lee Jae-gon have been way too good. I think they've been one of the best duos in the league, not just among supports, but among any position duo. That'll be enough to help carry the Excelsior, or the Dragons past the Excelsior. And so we'll end up with Dragons winning in Asia and the Shock winning in NA. And I know, I'm not here for entertainment, I'm here for accuracy and analysis. So I do think the Dragons and Shock will win it out. But I cannot tell you guys how excited I am. Like New York Excelsior, Hangzhou Spark, I would pay to watch that match any week. And like Spitfire Dynasty, I would pay to watch that match any given week. That'd be so cool. Those are some of my favorite matchups. We have a ton of crazy like randomness going on here. I could see so many of these matches being upsets. Like seriously, if you're not on upset alert, be ready. The Dallas Fuel, I really think they're strong upset favorites against the Eternal. I think the Atlanta Reign are big upsets against the Fusion. I think the Mayhem should be able to upset the Fusion fairly easily. And if the Titans, hey man, there's always a chance that they could take down the Valiant, even though I don't think that one's as much. But like, it's crazy. And then, there's just so much variance. Obviously, that's part of what makes these brackets fun, is that it's so hard to get them right. But it's so much fun to speculate and discuss beforehand why you think these teams are so good compared to afterwards. So I've been Emrat, thank you so much for watching.